Suddenly, everybody wants to do AI.
Wave of AI.
Of AI.
But AI.
Of artificial intelligence.
I'd sort of say, don't focus where the crowd is going. They're mostly just following each other as lemmings.
And I'm curious to hear about other industries where you're excited for the innovation that's going to happen with LLMs.
I'm hard-pressed to find an area that won't be innovated radically. I don't mind something that has a 90% chance of failing if there's a 10% chance of changing the world. Frankly, it's like climbing Mount Everest, only much more fun.
Welcome to Building with AI, the show where we engage in conversations with world-class product builders and leaders. We help you uncover tactical insights to help you build and scale better AI products. I'm your host, Hamza Choudery, and today we have a very special guest, Vinod Khosla, founder of Khosla Ventures and the first investor in OpenAI. Vinod has been a key figure in the history of Silicon Valley, and it is no surprise that he has been at the center of the latest wave of AI adoption. During the episode, Vinod shares his philosophy on risk, advice for entrepreneurs building with AI, views on open source versus API models, the AI race between the US and China, and much more. But before we dig in, here's a quick word from our sponsor. Autoblocks is the leading AI evaluation platform for product teams. It enables your team to collaboratively iterate on prompts, model parameters, and RAG parameters, while letting you retain full control over whatever frameworks or tech stack you want to build with. Seamlessly run tests to evaluate the impact of product changes on quality. Learn how to ship more reliable LLM products at autoblocks.ai. Now, back to the episode. We have a treat today, a guest that requires no introduction, a critical character in the saga of Silicon Valley. Vinod Khosla is joining us on Building with AI today to share his wisdom and insights on the AI space. How's it going, Vinod?
It's going great. Always excited to talk to people interested in AI.
Awesome. And we're very keen to hear your insights on the space. Before we dig into your thoughts on the AI space, any recent developments in your understanding of the space, I would love to go back to 1970 and just hear more about how you built this habit of going against the grain. I know that you grew up in an army household, and that was the beaten path that you could have gone down. Can you take us back to that time and what compelled you to go down the route of tech innovation and entrepreneurship?
I was always driven by curiosity and my own objectives, not what others expected of me. So I never felt constrained. I was always interested in tech, though nobody around me worked in tech. Nobody around me worked in business. We were in Army cantonment, which is the military section of town. And so in a very different world, but I was curious. I read a lot. I'd rent old magazines, which was the way you got to things in India. And I read about Intel's founders, Andy Grove, who's a Hungarian immigrant, coming here and starting a company. And I got enamored with the idea of you could do that, especially in technology. And I'd always had this strong interest in science and math, what you could do with it.
Awesome. And when you read about Andy Grove and the founding of Intel, how much of your drive was driven by the possibilities of technology, and how much was driven by just the American dream at large, the fact that you could come to this country and build a name for yourself by sheer will?
No, that wasn't really the motive. The motive was what you can do with technology, what you can learn, how much more you can do. And that was all exciting. And still is. Like many, many years later, that's still what excites me.
Incredible. Although this word humanitarian isn't often used to describe you, often folks describe you as a visionary, a very bold business leader, a risk taker. After reading a lot of your writing, it struck me that your techno-optimism is really grounded in this undercurrent of humanitarianism. How do we drive technology forward in a way that benefits humanity at large? Can you give us some insight into how you fostered this worldview?
I am a techno-optimist. I am an optimist about what we can do with technology. I think the difference with some others is I say techno-optimism with empathy. I have way more than I ever expected I'd have. And so I don't feel like I need to do much for myself. But the highest leverage thing to do is deploy large amounts of capital on projects that could have a large impact. It's frankly a hard thing to do, and hard things are fun to do. And so this idea of techno-optimism with empathy is what's missing. I'm not this libertarian, everybody for themselves kind of approach. So a long time ago, probably around the year 2000, I looked at what problems I should work on. I was post-financial, very early in my life. In my 20s, I got post-financial. My first startup, Daisy Systems, was quite successful and went public. And so I had the freedom to see what I wanted. And it's sad for me when people don't ask that question. Most people get caught up in what's expected. Should you do another bigger startup? Should you do a bigger title in some company, promotion, a bigger car, a bigger house? Not in what makes them happy. I'm very clear what makes me happy, and combining it with things that have an impact is just fun to do, and frankly, one that I feel like I'm qualified to do in a way that I have an advantage in doing. Others can do, but very few others can do effectively, which is apply technology to large problems like fusion, like plant proteins, like public transit, like Mach 5 flight. You look at all these things and say, how many people can actually do this? It's a small number. And so it's a good use of my time.
Awesome. And I know that you wrote a 50-page manifesto on the next act of your career where you outlined this vision for reinventing societal infrastructure. And you really foreshadowed a lot of the developments in the AI space in particular in that piece. I'm keen to hear about how you cultivate this imagination for the future. It really requires a certain level of creativity to foresee things that haven't existed in the past. It's easy to extrapolate the past, as you say, but being a visionary, being able to see what's possible, what drove that innate skill in you?
I would say two things, and especially to a young audience, what I would say is I was very fortunate. I was an electrical engineer at IIT Delhi. My master's degree is in biomedical engineering. Then I worked in every field except those two. And I've changed fields very frequently since then. And this cross-disciplinary training I highly recommend to everybody. And what it has helped me do is to not get caught up in the details of any one area, but to be able to look across areas and synthesize larger things. You have a big AI audience. AI is interesting, but AI in the context of so many other areas, whether it's construction or drug discovery, those become connecting pieces together. And I think that sort of got me very curious about, and frankly, it's a lot of fun to do. But I think that's the ability that I've cultivated. Next week at TED, I'll be talking about possible tomorrows that we want to create and can create with technology, a dozen of them, which most experts would say are not possible or not likely. And I will argue they're very, very likely if some entrepreneur makes them happen. And it only takes one entrepreneur to make that happen because they're technologically feasible, economically feasible, and societally desirable, like fusion power or public transit. What people get limited by is what the experts are saying. And experts mostly just extrapolate the past. They don't have vision of technology, and entrepreneurs invent the future they want. And there's a fundamental difference between those two approaches to predicting what you want to have happen. If you believe radical change won't happen, you won't attempt it. And so I think it's very damaging when people listen to expert forecasts. I'll give you a good example. When Elon Musk started Tesla, nobody believed electric cars would be important. In fact, the Department of Energy here had a forecast for a very tiny number of electric cars in the year 2035. So in 2010, they had a 25-year forecast that Elon exceeded in 5 years. Why? Because they talked to people like General Motors and Volkswagen, not to entrepreneurs. And nobody gives credibility to entrepreneurs. The other thing to keep in mind for your audience is when you attempt a lot of things fail. And sometimes I say my willingness to fail allows me to succeed. I don't mind something that has a 90% chance of failing if there's a 10% chance of changing the world. Frankly, it's like climbing Mount Everest, only much more fun for me. Every person's different. I still would love to climb Mount Everest too, not to get that wrong. This idea of believing things are possible and then driving to make them possible is what's important and how society changes. My other favorite saying is improbables are not unimportant. Only improbables are important. We just know which improbable of 1,000 improbables is important. And that's what entrepreneurs are. They take a lot of shots on goal. They try a lot of things. Most fail. But the thing that affects technology is the 1 out of 1,000 that work.
Totally. And I know that you outlined this goal of providing 7 billion people the level of affluence and prosperity as 700 million enjoy today. And extrapolating the past is really a gloomy picture for the future because given our current technological level of innovation, that isn't feasible.
Yeah, no. And that was an exercise. I'd done almost everything I wanted, had everything I needed after I turned 60. And I said, what should I work on? And I spent a lot of time thinking about the problems I should work on. And I should go back and tell you, in the year you talked about the humanitarian or impact end, in the year 2000, I'd sort of done everything I wanted. I didn't have a career to pursue. I don't think in terms of careers. So there was no goal to achieve per se. And I said, two large problems. One is climate, one is poverty. So I spent a lot of time with Professor Yunus back then, visited Bangladesh, visited microfinance organizations in Bangladesh, India, Kenya, other places, and thought that was a powerful economic model he had, and it'd be good to work on. And then I looked at climate, and climate turned out to be an equally large problem. And over the next couple of years, I said, many people can work on poverty. I can uniquely work because the technology angle on climate technologies. And so I started working on that. Fast forward to 5 years ago, after I turned, it was more maybe 7 or 8 years ago, after I turned 60, I said, what problems should I work on? And I started laying out all the problems I could work on and realized that first, if 10% of the people on the planet have a rich lifestyle, and 100% wanted. We can't have 10 times the amount of steel, 10 times the number of doctors, 10 times the number of cars. It goes on. And so we had to come up with clever solutions. In clever solutions that multiply resources can only come from technology. There is no other way to multiply resources. Of course, you need right policy. And that's where I started saying, oh, so I can work on these because they require an appreciation of technology. And I know how to do that. And started looking at these large problems, wrote a 50-page document on what I'd like to work on the next 20 years. And 8 or 9 years later, it's still the next 25 years now that I'll work on it. I'm an optimist. And these are very hard problems, like low-carbon steel. How do you do steel cement without carbon capture, without carbon, with low-carbon cement? How do you do low-carbon power while also making these services accessible? We can come back and talk to it. All of that was really exciting, but hard, very hard, and most likely to fail if you attempt it. Those were the right kinds of problems that were challenging enough, more challenging than playing golf.
Definitely. This mantra of risk is a religion is really interesting, and I think your worldview and philosophy on risk is so congruent with the stage of investing that you do, very much so aligned with the power law. I'm curious to hear about the chicken and egg situation here. Do you have this perspective on risk because you're an early stage venture, or did you go into early stage venture because you've always believed in the power of risk?
I always believed in the power of risk. That old saying, nothing ventured, nothing gained, has been a philosophy. And most people don't like to fail, so they don't venture out into anything new. If I can convince one or two people in your audience to take a different approach, failures don't matter. You get past them. If you're not egocentric, when you fail, you say, I failed. Now let's try the next thing that's worth trying. I use the phrase on important projects that some things are too important not to try, and it doesn't matter what the probability of success or failure is. That's what we did when we invested in plant proteins when nobody was doing it. It wasn't even a term. That's what we did when we invested in fusion when nobody was doing it. These were too important to not try. And if enough people tried and took different shots on goal, then I think we'd have success. That was my view. And frankly, if you don't take risks, you can't possibly innovate. There's no such thing as innovation without risk. And so the only thing you have to decide, given your personal circumstance, how much risk can you take, which is how much innovation can you shoot for. I would argue most people can take a lot more risk than they think they can, because most people who have academic credentials or other credentials can, in fact, get up and get another job if one fails. It's not like you'll go hungry or your family will go hungry for most technical people. And so you just say, fine, I'll take this job. If it doesn't work, I'll do the next one or try something great. It's always possible to go back. But as I say, most people fail to try. I'd rather try and fail than fail to try.
I'd love to shift the conversation and talk a bit more about AI and your perspective on the space. Before we get into the industry and your general advice to founders in the space, I know that your son is currently innovating on primary care, powering that with AI, as well as your wife who's democratizing tutoring at CK12 using AI. How did AI become a household endeavor for the Khosla family?
Well, I've long believed in the power of AI to make a large impact. Most people don't think of AI this way. The world uh, lives on deep expertise, whether it's an oncologist or a structural engineer or a climate scientist. And what AI is doing is making expertise free. How do you then leverage it for the maximum good? If you could give free primary care to everybody on the planet for $1 or two, it doesn't matter how long it takes. It's worth attempting that. And so after my son got his 3 degrees at Stanford, I said, do something that would have a real impact. My wife has worked on ck12.org for a long time, and they have 40 to 50 million people users a year. For a nonprofit, that's a very, very large website with free content, free problem sets, all that kind of stuff. And it was clear that AI-based tutors would equalize education. Most of us have parents who could afford to send us to give us personal tutors, or many of us do. I shouldn't say most. But if every student could have that for near free, it's huge impact. It's a huge need, and it's a fun challenge to do. Now, those two are done deals in my view. Like there's zero chance, subject to regulatory, that technology isn't there. That technology is going to be available in the next couple of years to have an app that does everything a primary care physician can do when they're not directly in front of the patient, like feeling out their stomach or something. Obviously, an AI today can't feel. But most of what primary care physicians can do can be done, and why not provide it to everybody on the planet? Why have somebody in a village in India take 3 days to visit a doctor? Going to a small town to go visit a doctor, why not make it instantly available? Or a mother with a sick child in the US, why should they have to wait for a couple of weeks to get an appointment? Why not, or go to emergency, which is a really bad way to go? Have primary care available right there. So I do think these are powerful tools that everybody should have.
Amazing. And in addition to digital health and education, where personalization is very important, I'm curious to hear about other industries where you're excited for the innovation that's going to happen with LLMs.
I would have to first say, don't restrict it to LLMs, because many more things are possible in AI, and this is just the first inning of a long match. The second thing I would say is I'm hard-pressed to find an area that won't be innovated radically. I mentioned structural engineer. You can do structural engineering with AI instead of a human being. You could do chip design with an AI. You could do AutoCAD with an AI. I would ask the other question, what can't be done? You can build a financial analyst with an AI. You can build customer support with AI. You could do agents that do tasks for people. So the broader I look, the more excited I get. Most of medicine, mental health therapists should be built with AI. Recruiters should be built with AI. You know, we have a company that does physical therapy with AI remotely. Nutrition, Healthify Me in India does nutrition with AI. So we are nowhere near limits on where AI can be applied. In fact, I'm still hard-pressed to find an area where it can't be applied.
And in terms of the teams going after these big opportunities, are there any traits or characteristics you've seen in successful AI product teams that you can share with our audience?
First, I think there's a big difference between AI engineers and software engineers, and people often confuse that. One always needs a person in a team that understands the problem. People always ignore or often ignore the product management aspect of formulating the problem you try to solve correctly in the context of problems some user has. So composing the right team is very tricky. Yeah, and it's one of the things I spend a lot of time advising entrepreneurs on how to compose their teams. I have a few things I've written on our website that are pretty old but still relevant. But I would just say team building is very hard. Obviously, picking the right market, and then within a market, picking the right approach to a market. Which part of the market? Where do you build your MVP? Where do you get your toehold in the market? All those are tricky things. And the right team in the right market can still fail because of tactics and strategy. Yeah.
In 2023, we saw a lot of funding go to the infrastructure layer for Gen AI, and proportionally a much smaller amount of funding go to the application layer. I'm curious to hear insights on that general trend and whether we're going to see that shift and see more funding to help actually take this technology and create stuff that has tangible value in the market.
So things to remember. First, funding is not a good indicator of where the interesting opportunities are. We invest in OpenAI. We made that decision in 2018. Once it's successful, everybody wants to invest in that area. People were doing crypto. People were doing Web3. Suddenly, everybody wants to do AI. So I'd sort of say, don't focus where the crowd is going. They're mostly just following each other as lemmings. Go where first principles thinking says something can be done. It's very exciting to see how you could transform media, music, animation, lots of things in media. It's exciting to see how you could change programming and how you could change robotics. All kinds of other tools. I mentioned things like chip design or product design or website design or antibody design in biology. You pick your favorite area. There's so much to do. Are these things going to get more important? Yes. But we probably already have more than 35, 40 investments in these application areas and always looking for more. Don't follow what others are doing. Think for yourself from first principles. Where can AI make a large difference, and apply your thinking? So this is where good AI people need to team up with the right kinds of investors to even discuss what areas to apply themselves to. By the way, if somebody gets interested in primary care or AI tutors for everybody, which is non-profit, I'd love to have them work with these companies. We're recruiting in all these areas. But there's probably 40 other companies recruiting for AI talent in our portfolio.
Awesome. I'm sure you'll be seeing a lot of resumes coming your way. I want to shift over to the race between open source models and API models. I know that you are an ardent critic of open source models, primarily because it gives China an advantage in this AI race. I'm curious to shed a bit more light on that and imagine a future where China does get ahead of the US. What is at stake here?
At Sun, we started basically the open source movement with NFS and all that. That was the most visible. That was before Linux and before other open source projects. We are the investors in GitLab, which is open source. GitHub, most people don't realize, wasn't open source. It was for open source. GitLab was open source for open source and private source, very broadly. So I've been a huge fan of open source and still am. Only thing I'm talking about is state-of-the-art models, which can benefit China in this race. Why is that important? Because whoever wins this race of AI technology over the next 20 years or so will have strong economic influence. And whoever has strong economic influence will have strong political influence. So I think what's at stake is that the world believe in liberal philosophies, things like freedom of speech, or it believes in more authoritarian kind of approach to life, as in China's approach and the CCP's approach. They like centralized control. I'm not an authoritarian approaches to system, and they're reasonable arguments. I'm not saying those are bad arguments. They prefer that political system. I don't. And so I think the right political system for the rest of the world, not just the US, is at stake.
And if regulation doesn't intervene to limit the distribution of open source models, is there any other path to us slowing down China's speed of innovation?
It's never by itself either the complete solution or sufficient. What I'd say is it can help slow China down and accelerate us, like banning chips into China, the latest NVIDIA chips into China. That's a really good idea. Not giving them access to state-of-the-art models is a big idea. But they will still hack every company they can to try and steal those technologies. That's well established. They will then use it to exercise influence and control. I just had an op-ed in the Financial Times today, in fact, saying why TikTok should be banned. Because it's an instrument through which future persuasive AI could be used to influence voters in a way that would be detrimental to liberal values, in my view. And I say liberal values because it applies all over the world, not just in the West. And I think it's pretty important. Fundamental freedoms survive political systems.
And to double click into the API model providers, obviously you were the first investor in OpenAI. I'm curious to hear about how you view other players in the space, such as Anthropic and Cohere.
This race is getting very expensive. Anthropic's recently talked about $5 to $10 billion to train a single model. Next generation 2025, 2026 kinds of models. So it will be hard for too many people to keep up. I don't believe there'll be one. There will be multiple. What I think we will see over the next 2 years is many people who were chasing models. My bet is Anthropic will do fine, it'll do well. OpenAI will do well, Google will do well, Baidu will do well. And then there's some country-specific models. We invested in Sarvam in India for a model focused on Indian scripts, Indian languages, Indian culture. We've done a similar one in Japan called Sakana that's focused on kanji script and Japanese culture. So I do think we'll see a diversity of it. But people directly trying to compete with GPT-4 or 5, and I'm very excited about what 5 and 6 can be, will go the way of inflection. They can't compete directly. So, somebody like Cohere, hard to tell. Can they get that much money? Hard to tell. They be more likely will pivot into some other business. I do think there will be a bigger distance between every developer and the top developers in the top models. They'll pay for data that others don't have access to in many ways. So I do think there'll be more separation, but two important messages. There are many more approaches than transformer models that might show up over the next 10 years or 5 years. Just earlier this week, one of our investments got a big article in Fortune, Symbolica, on neurosymbolic approaches. We invested in Rabbit, which is a neurosymbolic approach, not a transformer approach. So are there approaches that don't take that much money? Yes, there are. Should people be trying them? Absolutely. Will probabilistic programming approaches work or add significantly? Yes. So I do believe there will be other complementary approaches, not that LLMs will go away, but things will be additive that do things more efficiently in certain domains, are stronger in some areas. Human beings are like that. If you look at education, people talk about types of intelligences in human beings and teaching to that type of intelligence and that type of skill. There's people whose brains are low temperature in the AI sense and are very creative, but can hallucinate, and others who are very reasoning-centric and first principles-centric. That's a different kind of brain. That's not to say one brain is better than another, one style of thinking is better, but there is diversity, and I think we'll see that in AI models too. And then, of course, the whole world of applications is wide open.
And do you see space in the market for vertical-specific models as well, in addition to these country-specific models?
I don't know the answer to that. Intuition would say yes. If you have 250 million ECGs like AliveCore has, can you train a model just for that? Or train a model for imaging? And we have a project to do imaging-specific models that don't differentiate between ECGs and MRIs and X-rays and CT scans or ultrasound, like just treat imaging. So intuition says that's true. Experience says the large language models are learning so many things, and what they lack in specificity in an area, they gain in other areas. Like nobody training imaging model throws in programming code so the model gets better at reasoning. That's not happening. So whether post-training is the right approach to be domain-specific, whether fundamental models need to be created, whether multiple models or mixture of models approaches, too hard to tell. And I don't think anybody, even the most sophisticated people, can say for sure. And so we just have to try things. I try and be as open-minded and as to what will work as possible.
And in these early innings of the LLM Gen AI wave, it makes a ton of sense for businesses to use the best models as they're trying to prove product market fit. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on any concerns around creating these dependencies on this intelligence layer as these products scale and these products become core to these businesses.
It's a trade-off between no dependence and not a good model and some dependence. But we've always relied on that. We rely on various clouds and we get tied to various clouds. We develop for Windows or iPhone or other platforms. So I do think leveraging platforms makes a lot of sense. Trying to worry about that risk when you have much larger risks of is your application going to work well enough and really solve a problem? That's a much bigger risk, and I think the focus should be on solving a problem really well. Obviously, being able to move between models is important, and I think should be relatively not easy, but possible, I would say.
And can you elaborate on this idea of AI as a reasoning engine? I know you alluded to a future where we will have tools just like humans have tools for completing specific tasks, and the AI will be able to reason which tool is required to achieve a specific task. Can you elaborate on that idea a bit?
Andrej Karpathy gave a great talk recently that I had tweeted. Said LLMs can use tools. An LLM can multiply a 3-digit number with another 3-digit number, but way more efficient and more likely to be more accurate to just pick up a calculator and do the calculation in a predictable way. If you're in certain things are database lookups, that's a tool. So databases are a tool. You don't have to guess at things or probabilistically arrive at answers. You can get precise answers. I would say, and this is a really big part of the new agent architectures and multi-agent architectures, where they get to use the tools that be most effective for a task. They get to break down any task into the components and call different tools. If I'm going to get to my next meeting in time, I will need to look at my calendar and say, where is the location? I will have to look up on Google Maps and say, what's the traffic? I'll have to look up on Uber to make sure how long does an Uber take to come. Composing all those tasks an agent will do, and then use these tools like an Uber app to compose an answer and get me an answer. It may need to check the weather if the weather isn't good today, or if there's an event going on and say, hey, this route will have traffic or some other event going on. You might want to avoid this, or there's something on the freeway that you should avoid, construction or something. So all these things are tools a good agent will deploy. I'm pretty excited about something like Rabbit, which is really what Rabbit is, and we've seen this in a number of instances, is a tool, a model. They call it large action network, not a large language model, that's learned to use software. So model trained to use software. And that's very, very powerful in the context of agents. One of the more exciting things for those people who are in medicine, who are physicians, mostly in the West, they're using an EMR or health record system called Epic, which is very hard to use. And I just saw a statistic, an emergency room doctor goes through 4,000 clicks in a day, mouse clicks, trying to do whatever they do in a shift. I think that was the number. Some stunningly, having a system that can use Epic and talk to the human in natural language is pretty important. It saves a lot of physician time, probably saves a lot of errors. So we have a company trying to learn how to use Epic and other medical systems in the medical context to save doctors' time, can save 30-40% of a doctor's time because it's learned to use Epic, and the doctor only needs to know how their natural language and voice, which obviously every physician knows, or most physicians know how to use.
I'm curious to shine a light on another part of the industry. The Databricks and Snowflakes of the world have really been leaning into AI. And in a future where data and your AI are going to be interacting on an ongoing basis, on a regular basis, this value prop of having your AI and data live in one closed system, a secure system, seems compelling from afar. I'm curious to hear your general take on that.
Let's go back to my model on LLMs using tools. Data is useful. Now, to be honest, once these models are trained, data is not as useful in training a model. And I separate old AI, which is fixed AI, and learning AI. And I think the most powerful kind of AI will be AI that's constantly learning. And even today's LLMs, they get trained and then they're not learning. Most people in robotics are trying to build robots that actually constantly learn from the new environment. And I think that'll be a distinguishing characteristic of AI models that learn continuously, like humans do. But there's this sort of separation going on when people say, I was doing this AI 10 years ago. I say they don't know what AI is when somebody says that to me, or what modern AI is. Now, to your data question, a lot of the old AI was statistical techniques on data, support vector machines, pick your favorite, even simple regression, various versions of all that. So you have to separate that. But that doesn't make data less important. We still need to access data. Whether data alone is sufficient to train successful models on, the answer is probably not. What we've learned, if we've learned anything, is scale matters a lot. And there's debate on how long scaling can go on. But there's also a debate. The big fashion is now multimodal. Because when you learn images in the same model that you learn language, in the same model you're learning computer code, every one of those functions gets better. And that's been our experience. And the less humans apply their intuition, the better the model gets. Obviously, the better lesson is a good blog by Rick Sutton, that humans shouldn't screw up things by applying their intuition or their judgment. Just apply more compute and keep scaling so far. But I do think that won't be the only paradigm. But hopefully I answered your database question.
This has been an amazing conversation. Would love to close out with a rapid fire round. Let's start off with some contrarian hot takes that you have on the AI space.
Neurosymbolic will be important. Probabilistic programming will be important.
Other AI investors that you respect?
Oh, there's lots of people. Nat Friedman's been doing a lot of stuff. Most of the venture firms are Johnny-come-lately. They don't have much expertise and not a very sophisticated understanding, but there's quite a few people who have a sophisticated understanding of AI.
When can we expect to see AGI?
Well, it depends on how you define AGI. I define AGI very specifically, which is when an AI can do 80% of all jobs that are economically valuable. So I don't care about philosophers, AI being a philosopher. But if they could do 80% of the job of 80% of economically valuable jobs, I think that's pretty close to a definition of a super intelligent AI. And that's at least my initial definition, sort of in the 10-year time frame, with the caveat that'll happen if we let it. The American Medical Association may say we won't let an app be a primary care physician, and suddenly they can use their political clout to say you can't bill for AI consults, and then it won't happen. So subject to that, I think we are well within the 10-year range to do 80% of all economically valuable jobs. 2/3 of all jobs in terms of headcount should be able to be done with an AI, will be capable of being done. But I use the word capable carefully, because just because it's capable doesn't mean we use it. We have a democratic process, and interests and special interests can slow things down. Labor unions could slow down robots. We saw this in the Screen Actors Guild. Of course, the Screen Actors ensured that the big companies that don't use AI go out of business, and it's a great opportunity for startups to innovate in that space. Startups that are not constrained by those agreements that the Screen Actors Guild did. It's an opportunity.
What is your biggest motivation when you get up in the morning?
my biggest motivation is to work on really hard problems with large impact using where technology is the solution. There's lots of problems where technology isn't the solution. So let me be clear about that. Technology isn't a solution to all problems, but the ones where technology is a solution, I have a differential advantage and insight, and applying that absolutely is my goal and gets me very excited. I'm like a kid in a candy shop. And my goal over the next 25 years, I'm 69, if I'm healthy, is to make sure the possible tomorrows actually happen. Not all of them will happen for lots of reasons. Other special interests get in the way, but I'll try and make as many of them happen. If we can have the world live on plant proteins, if we can have public transit to replace most cars on the planet, if we can have fusion, if we can have Mark V jets running on sustainable fuel, all those are great ideas to work on.
Do you enjoy being an operator more or an investor?
In 40 years, I've never called myself an investor, but I'm not an operator. I'm what I call a venture assistant. I help entrepreneurs build their ventures. I will argue with them, I'll debate with them, I'll let them do their thing, but I think I can help them in many, many ways. And this venture assistance is how I define what I do. And that's what I hope I can do to help solve these large problems.
This has been such a wonderful conversation, Vinod. Any parting thoughts for AI builders out there?
My parting thought, we define our business is we like to invest early, we like to invest for impact, and we like to invest boldly. So bold, early, impactful is how we define our technology-based investing. I would suggest those three words are critical to large impact.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time today, Vinod. That's been a masterclass for all of the builders out there, and we're looking forward to seeing what the future has in store for you. Hopefully that 25-year career continues to extend further into the future of the world.
Cross my fingers and health permitting.
Yep. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Of course.